All right, we're live streaming. I'm going to start the cable broadcast real quick.
Okay.
Okay, Mayor, we are ready to go.
Okay. Well, for tonight's City Council conference of Tuesday, May 26th, we have one item on the agenda, and that is the discussion regarding an agreement with the Oklahoma Humane Society to provide shelter services for the City of Norman Animal Welfare Center. And I believe we have a presentation.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Clark. Do you all have access to the PowerPoint that was provided?
Mark, if you'll go ahead and share your screen, that would be helpful.
And it is on everyone's iPads under the FTP folder. But yes, sharing of screen is best.
All right, I've got split screen, so are you able to see that?
Yes.
Great. All right, so this is that first slide. So wanted to start off with a mission here that we have at Norman Animal Welfare. And I've highlighted promoting and protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the residents and pets of Norman. And I really think that this initiative really speaks to that point in our mission. I also wanted to include a quote from an industry leader, Brent Tollner. And he also is talking about, the further movement of the traditional shelter away from that traditional shelter paradigm to something more akin to a community resource hub and a social service provider. So I wanted to include that. That's kind of the spirit that I'm moving forward and my foundation for discussing this. So second slide here, I just put together a whole bunch of points that I wanted to talk about real briefly about how this partnership can benefit Norman Animal Welfare. So just real quickly, our foster program, we have one, we do the best we can, but we do not have dedicated people who are facilitating that program. OK Humane is foster based. So they have well over 400 animals out in foster homes right now. So bringing that those dedicated people and those resources to Norman Animal Welfare would be a huge benefit to our existing foster program. Volunteer program as well. We have one and we do the best we can with the resources we have. But OK Humane's volunteer program is far, far bigger than ours. Again, we would benefit from that. Behavioral assessment program, basically that's the component where we're taking animals into our shelter and providing the best that we can, especially with the dogs, to assess their behavior and their temperament and provide them a path for a live outcome. Currently, that's me. Oklahoma Humane goes through many more animals than we do here, and they have dedicated staff and a lot more expertise that would be able to account for that. Sorry, my light went out. Hold on a second. Can we go turn it back on? That might happen more than once, so I apologize. The rescue program. Again, we have about 90 local rescues that are on our list that we reach out to if we have any animals that fit into their programs. Their list and their contacts are far bigger and far deeper than ours. Special events and community, they have a department that addresses those needs, sets up those special events, and provides for that community education component, which is a real huge factor. That's something that we could really benefit from with that community education here in Norman. Marketing, public relations, social media, website. Again, we rely on the PD and their resources right now, but they have a department that provides for that as well. Transport programs, that's something that we're right now not able to utilize in order to move our animals out in a timely fashion. So we would be able to capitalize on their transport programs. Community cat program. Currently, we have instituted that into our ordinances as of last September, but we have not had the resources to get that community cat program into our shelter yet. So that would be a big advantage to our cats. Neonate program, they have a specialized department that takes in the puppies and kittens that are too young to eat on their own, that still need to be bottle fed. That's where we use our foster program people to get those animals out as well. But they have a dedicated neonate program that takes those animals too. And we currently, if we are overrun with puppies or kittens that we do not have space for in our foster program, we call them up, and we've got several animals out to them as we have the need. Adoption program, they are currently partnering with Oklahoma City Animal Welfare, and they pull animals from them. So they have a very robust adoption program that we would be able to benefit from as well too. And that would be also in conjunction with our adoption program and our adoption facility that we have here. The vet program, so they have a separate facility that they have, that they provide low cost, no cost veterinary procedures for their community. They have, I believe, 3 full-time vets and several RVTs. So bringing that program down here as well and combining with our single full-time vet and single RVT would provide a lot more capacity there as well too. They also have a advisory board for their vet department. So we would benefit greatly from that as well too. Obviously, they have a very large board of directors, and so they have a good amount of governance and fiscal oversight. So we would enjoy that as well. I'll move to the second or the third, now the fourth slide. So these are the bullet points so far that we have been discussing. This is the information that we've provided to them. We have not heard back at this point from their legal. So again, these are the points that we've discussed with them and shared with them. So just to bring you guys all up to speed about where we're at. But again, we have not heard back from their legal on any of these bullet points and how they need to be adjusted. So I can definitely share with you guys and bring you up to what we've got so far. So again, just the basic bullet points. I've highlighted the definite talking points. So if you have any questions, we can jump in. I assume that you've hopefully have all seen this already. But what I want to highlight down there is the bottom bullet there from the bottom, second one up from the bottom. It's collect fees for pet adoptions, pet licenses, impound services, quarantine, microchip implantation, boarding, euthanasia. Basically, it's everything that comes over our counter. And all of that, that intake, all that revenue would go directly to the society as we have it at this point, except any revenue that comes in for the city pet licenses. And then obviously, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. When you're ready for questions, we have questions.
Great. I can go page by page, or I can go through the whole thing and then we can come back and do questions. How do you prefer?
What is your preference, Mayor?
I was going to ask the same question of him because I've got several questions now. So with that in mind, maybe we should just start now so we don't forget them as we go along.
That'll work. That'll work. Yes. So, so any questions on these bullet points?
Okay, we'll start with Councilmember Bierman.
Mark, thanks for kicking this off. I've got kind of a few top line questions before we kind of get into the nitty gritty details. Can you talk a little bit about the benefits of a public-private partnership with a group like Central Oklahoma Humane versus something like moving the shelter into its own department or into Parks and Rec, which I'm sure just needs one more thing to do. So can you talk about why this is a preferable option to something else, maybe more within the city?
Yes. Well, so this is a business model that is out there in the thousands, specifically in the animal field that I'm aware of, be it zoos or be it the municipal animal shelter component. So bringing those two entities, bringing in the municipal piece and the nonprofit piece, and combining them just provides a whole lot more resources, a whole lot more flexibility. It's a really good amalgamation that works really well to provide excellent services and excellent animal welfare. Be it the nonprofit's ability to bring in donations and quickly utilize those donations. The tax exempt status, that the city enjoys, the revenue base that the city enjoys. It's just a really good amalgamation to bring in these two, like I said, business entities, and it makes for a very, very robust entity. So, I've worked with this with zoos, and there are, again, countless other municipal shelters out there that have partnered with nonprofits to great effect.
Thank you. And can you speak a little bit more specifically about why not move this under another city department or move under its own department? And maybe that's something more for Daryl or someone like that. But, I've gotten some questions about this kind of as the news of this initiative has kind of trickled out. Questions of, well, why not put it under Parks and Rec, or why not make it its own department? And so, I have my own thoughts as to why not do that. But I know that there are some thoughts from the city's perspective about the cost to do that, or the overburdening of another department like the Parks and Rec department. So if we could just speak to that a little bit, that way the public has a sense of why this is the preferred way to go.
Councilmember Bierman, if I may, Mark's done an excellent job in identifying the synergistic aspects of the proposed relationship. The model of animal control, animal welfare being a function of a police department is very common coast to coast. And it may have originated from instances for calls for service, where there's a vicious dog bite and that could result in or have resulted from a criminal act, or an act of negligence or animal abuse, those types of things. So the current model where our animal control function happens out of PD is considered usual and customary. There are also many, many models across the country where the city government runs its own animal shelter. And there are also probably equally as many examples of this type of partnership relationship with humane societies, the SPCA, different nonprofits across the country to provide the shelter service with a focus on the adoption side. There's a lot of positive name recognition, a lot of joint marketing opportunities, and of course the fundraising essence of how nonprofits provide that service does nothing but add value to ensure positive outcomes going forward. All of the services that we currently provide would continue to be provided. All of the field work, the collection of animals would still be done with all of our crews. And it was interesting when we first met with the Humane Society of Oklahoma City that they had as much interest in the city of Norman as we initially shared with the Humane Society, primarily because they recognize what the demand for these adoptable animals is. And that's what they're tapped into. That's their full-time mission in life. And it is a function of what we do, but it is not the function of what we do. So we've looked at this from several different angles, and the model that we are proposing, we think, results in the best outcomes for our four-legged residents. And at the end of the day, and it's a lesson from my mentor, the city manager from the city of Porterville, California. His name is Mr. Guy Huffaker. There are certain government functions that don't necessarily result in happy endings, and shelter operations is one of those. We believe with the Humane Society in this relationship, we can strive for, we believe we will achieve many, many more happily ever after scenarios with the capabilities the Humane Society brings to the table.
Great.
I would add to that if we move it to another department, we're not going to improve its ability really. You get it out from under the, maybe what I'd say is the red tape of the police department, but it still doesn't expand the services they can provide. So by partnering with the Humane Society, I think we expand the services that's available and the options for these animals, like the foster program, rather than staying in a pen down there. When you can foster something out, it's much better than being caged for 2 or 3 weeks at a time.
And frankly, that is exactly my feeling. I certainly didn't want to put words in the city's mouth, though. But when I first heard about this, that's exactly what I was thinking, is that would be a lateral move, and we're trying to improve the quality of care for animals, and this seems to be the way to do it. My last question before I turn it over to some of my fellow council members is, how much, if any, savings to the city are we looking at with this? I know that that's not the primary reason why we are looking at this kind of a change. If it's going to cost more, how much more? If it's going to save the city any money, do we have any estimates of what that would be?
Yes, we do, Your Honor. The police chief and I spent some time evaluating what was our historically busiest year in terms of the number of animal intakes, and factored that into our initial proposal to the Humane Society in terms of funding. At the end of the day, under the model, what we believe we will wind up with is the ability to avoid further requests of the general fund for money for facility maintenance. You may recall most recently we had some serious heating and air conditioning issues at the shelter and really didn't have a mechanism to identify reserves. Under this relationship, we think we'll be able to identify about $150,000 a year to be invested back in the shelter with no more impacts to the city's general fund.
Excellent. I love to hear that. So I do have other questions, but I'll wait until a little bit further on in the presentation when we kind of get down into the nitty gritty. So I appreciate it. Thanks for now, and I'll be back.
Okay, I believe Councilmember Wilson was next.
Okay. Hey guys, thanks so much for really working on this. This is, I know, probably controversial for some, but I really see it as, I feel like it could be hugely beneficial. So I have a couple questions. You mentioned private donations. I had already written this question down, so I want to kind of dig into that a little more. So they would be more nimble in that private donation world. I know now if there's a donation to the shelter, it has to go through council and then it has to get appropriated back out to the shelter at some point for purchases. So would it be more nimble and outside of that, but still be have plenty of oversight, I guess?
Yes, as long as the donations are going to Oklahoma Humane, I think they're a much more efficient on taking those in and getting the money spent on what they need to spend it on. If it still came to the city side, which I don't know why it would unless they was looking at enforcement for the field officers for something, we still go through the council, and just like you were saying, it takes a little longer to get those funds appropriated out for us.
Okay. Also, I guess I might have a little concern about donations meant for Norman animals going to some other program they have in the world. Have we talked to them about that in any way?
We just talked to them about donations in general, and they look at raising donations down here. Our donation funds of what we have and what you'll see on the council agenda tonight would be used locally for things that we're going to do here or things to improve our shelter or the way it runs.
Okay. Cool.
Your Honor, what we may be able to do based on that question is just clarify in writing with Dana and the folks at the Humane Society of OKC that when Norman residents have an idea and they would like to see that come to fruition in the Norman facility, if they make that request specifically known on their donation, if I'm sure the Humane Society would absolutely honor those wishes. And as long as they have a mechanism in place to divert those facility-specific donations back to that facility, I think we can get that memorialized in writing for this agreement going forward.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's something I think we would really want in writing. So I know that I'm familiar with this organization. I really like this organization, but I know that they send a lot of pets out of the state to the much needed areas that are, have less problems with overpopulation than what we have here. I'm wondering though, I hate to export all of our pets, so I'm wondering what the balance there would be, and how are they prepared to handle the non-adoptables as well? Because I know currently they get to kind of go into the shelter and pick the ones, and I know that they pick hard cases too, but I would be concerned that might be more of a shock to them than they are prepared for. I don't know.
Your Honor, that description of those animals that are a little more difficult to adopt, this is an area of expertise through the Humane Society and their giant network. There are community look for those dogs that most of us would deem more difficult to adopt. And they can find those markets and make sure all those dogs get a home, not just the little fuzzy cute ones, but some of the bigger, scarier ones that they're safe. And the Humane Society just has an excellent protocol for ensuring a successful adoption, not one that's going to result in somebody saying, hey, this isn't what I bargained for, you need to come pick this thing back up. They can reach out much further than we can on those difficult cases. And they did share with us, believe it or not, yep, there are people who are really looking for that type of big, sturdy service animal specifically. And we have a good population of them here. And they know kind of, nationwide where each breed is deemed, in highest demand, and, where they always know they can get those dogs back out into homes as efficiently as possible.
Thank you for that. I call those dogs the Oklahoma brown dog. But anywho's, a lot of them. And what was my next question? I would actually, I don't know this would be a problem, but I'm gonna go ahead and vocalize it, that there are still adoptable animals for our citizens that want to adopt animals. What would there be some priority given to some of our local people that are looking for an affordable animal that they could save here, and we're not just exporting all the animals? Not that I really think that's a problem.
We've done a couple of things, and where we talk about a synergistic relationship, meaning the sum of the parts is greater. And we do a couple of things that the Humane Society said we're better at. They love our chips, specifically when we chip pets. We have a better technology than they have, and they would like to roll our technology out to their side. On the technology side, what I can envision is the opportunity for us to develop and implement, and the Humane Society may already have this tool available. When we have Norman residents who have a wish list, I'm looking for a dog that's 10 to 15 pounds, short hair, doesn't shed much. This kind of disposition. When one of these comes available to me, will you notify me so I can come down and look at it? I think that would be an amazing tool. So you can build your wish list and get emails sent to you when something meeting your description comes through the door of the kennel. I think
that's cool.
Absolutely happen.
Okay, I have one last question. Thank you. I would really appreciate that. Yes, I do. Examples of other city services that we currently outsource and how that goes. Do you have any of those examples? I'm thinking we do a lot of, I don't know. I can't think of any that we do.
Recycling.
Oh,
Recycling is not in-house.
Transit.
Yeah.
That's the bus system.
Transit. I knew you smart people would think of something. I was like, I couldn't figure it out. Okay. And those all seem to go well. So I know that a lot of people are, the things I keep hearing are that people have concerns about the quality that would happen. So I feel like we have other systems that we've leaned on that were fine. Then one last question, I promise this is the last one. I am concerned about the employees that we currently have, and if they would have places to go and jobs they want to be in and opportunities that way.
Yes. right now, last time we talked to them, and keep in mind, we're just bringing this to you. We're on the front end of this on negotiating with them. We don't know
Sure.
where this will end or if it will work out, but they are planning on more employees here. So I think definitely they could take ours on. I would assume they would apply just like anywhere else, or we could look at other positions within the city for those employees, different than what they would be doing down there. But I think the Humane Society plans on expanding what our abilities are here with employees and the numbers.
And on that note, Your Honor, in our initial conversations with the CEO, we put this idea on the table, and the initial response was, that's a model we've been thinking about in some of our other communities, and we would love the ability to put this together operationally and work through it and then roll this out to all of our territories. So we think this is definitely an opportunity for them to shine. They are highly motivated to make sure it is successful because their goal would be to operate more facilities on behalf of cities just to improve the adoptable outcomes.
Okay, that made me have one more question. What happens if it does fail? I see that we have a 180-day cancellation. That's kind of the preliminary agreement there. But I would think that it might take us longer than 180 days to ramp back up into a fully functioning organization if we were to need to. So I guess I would have some concerns there. I don't know what you don't have to answer that, but that's just my concern.
And we agree. We see that too. If something would happen, how would we take it back in and what would that process be? So in case it does, we're prepared to do that rather than waiting until it happens and then panic. We want to have that plan in place beforehand.
Thank you, guys. I promise I'm done now.
Okay, you have a couple of more questions, and then there's several more slides on his presentation. So just keep that in mind as we go through these initial questions. Councilmember Scanlon.
There, finally unmuted. I've been sitting as a liaison to the Oversight Committee. And as this bubbled up, of course, it was a cause of much concern, much discussion. The overriding question in that forum was having to do with cost and cost benefit. Now, I've read the slides. I see where, in addition to the fees, we're going to give the Humane Society $400,000 a year, if I read it correctly. And I just heard that in addition to we'll furnish the building and $150,000 in maintenance towards that building. So I get back to their concern. How is this financially beneficial to the city?
The 150,000 that we are showing in savings is something that we could keep to address any building maintenance needs. When there's not building maintenance needs like that, we would accrue that money. Overall, from the budget of what it is right now, we're going to have a savings of around $150,000 a year.
Okay. The second one, and Councilmember Wilson touched on this, and that was about the people. And I know that rumors fly and have been flying for months now about this, about what happens to the people. I was heartened to hear that there may be a soft landing for all of the above. I think that's really important. And correct me if I'm wrong, but in that context, we're talking about the staff as opposed to the enforcement branch down there. That will still remain with you.
Yes, enforcement would remain with us.
This final comment I have, and it goes back to the Oversight Committee. One of the things that the center prides itself on is an incredibly high live release rate. Is there anything in any of the discussions that we've had with Humane Society about that statistic and how to maintain it? Where do we get a warm feeling that statistic, that excellent record will continue?
Yes, we have discussed that with them. They know ours is incredibly high compared even across the nation. And they have assured us that they plan to keep it there or improve on it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Councilmember Patron.
Hi. So I had a few kind of questions that came in from ward members. And I guess first to follow up on the conversation about the employees. Right now, for the current fiscal year, we had 16 employees at Norman Animal Welfare for a total 1.127 million year employment costs. Am I understanding that we currently believe that a certain number would either go to the Humane Society or they would be reassigned internally within the city? And if that's the case, what do you see that 16 number being reduced to, and that budget employee expense for Norman Animal Welfare changing to?
The people we would keep on here is right now in the plan that we've proposed to them, keeps Mark's salary on here, it keeps all the field people out, the enforcement side of it, the 5-6 people, including the supervisor. And you've got 10 at the shelter, and possibly those 10 would move over to Oklahoma Humane.
Okay. So we would basically be reducing to 6. And those, I think, follows up on my, and we would have to just do the math on that, but follows up on my second question, which is this, and you may talk about this later, but would we be keeping the trapping of rodents like skunks and possums? In the past, we've been able to rent traps, and the Norman Animal Welfare dealt with that issue. Is that still something that we would be doing? And what happens to those animals was asked after they've been trapped in a city trap. Do we release them back into the wild, or are they put down?
Generally, they will release them or take some to wild care. I think they may have a better answer, either Trey or Mark.
Yeah, so we in this plan, we still continue to provide those same services, so that trap rental would still be available to our citizens. And how we currently deal with the wildlife animals is they go to Wild Care, which is in Noble, which is a wildlife rehab center.
Okay, and that trapping service is available today if a resident wanted to go rent a trap. Is that?
That is correct.
Okay. And let's see. Would there be adoption fee changes anticipated should we go under this relationship?
That could be anticipated to happen. That's something that would be negotiated on what we want to do as we get further into this. Their adoption fees are higher than what we currently have. I'm not sure where they're at, but they're more than double what our fees are right now. But we are the lowest in the area, I believe. Mark may have a comment to that.
Yes, yeah, we are definitely low at our regular price of $50 per adoption. We've had those conversations, and again, you know, their intent is to keep everything the same, whether it be ordinances and or our fees. So those are the conversations we've had at this point.
Okay, but that would remain something that is within the control of the city, or that's part of the contract that is being negotiated?
The conversations that we've had so far, I don't think it made one of these bullet points, but the conversations we've had so far is that they would be able to amend our fee schedule with the city council's approval.
Okay. That sounds like it's going to need some more conversation for sure. And then the 2 more questions. Is the current shelter that we have today that was passed by the bonds, is it debt free? Does anybody know?
The bonds have been paid off.
Okay, so the building's been paid for.
Yes.
And then the last question for right now is the Citizens Oversight Board that's been referenced several times. would it still maintain, when we go under this relationship, or if we go under this relationship, would it still maintain the same influential oversight capacity that it enjoys today?
No, we can have people on their board, but that committee would not have oversight over Oklahoma Humane.
But it would have, what about with respect to our ordinances and advising council on ordinances?
Yes, they can do that.
Okay, that's all I have for right now. Thank you very much.
All right, shall I move on to the next slide?
I actually have a few questions, but I've also looked ahead, so I've seen all the slides. But let's go ahead and finish the society's obligations, because I know the last few slides are the actual agreement, but let's hit the bullet points before I ask my questions.
All right, moving to the next slide. Again, society's obligations. This is more bullet points regarding the reporting that will be done. So pretty straightforward. Slide 6, here's more of those impactful bullet points that we've already been discussing, the $400,000 per year, the $35 per animal transferred to the society. Also to discuss is that the city will be responsible to provide emergency vet care for animals not in its not under the society's purview. So, you know, basically those animals that come in the middle of the night that animal welfare is called out to, if there's a hit by car and they needed to provide emergency vet services, that would still be on the city. That's what that points to. And then also the responsible for all maintenance, upkeep, and utility would be the city's responsibility in the lease agreement. Any questions there?
That was one of my questions. It looked like on slide 5, it said that the society would maintain and operate the facilities. But then again, slide 7, it says the city is responsible for all maintenance and upkeep of the structure. So I feel like that would really need to be fleshed out, because just those 2 bullet points on 2 different slides kind of, unless I misunderstood that. So who would be responsible? Again,
for
let's
the
say
structure, the city of Norman would be responsible for the roof. If there were any, leaking problems, plumbing issues, any of the fixtures connected to the building, in terms of the daily maintenance and upkeep of the interior, keeping it clean and mopped and swept and those types of things, would all be the responsibility of the Humane Society. They'd empty their own trash and clean the facility as needed, but we would be responsible for the structural elements, the HVAC system, and the major building components.
Got it, which hopefully, since we've just built it and replaced the HVAC, there should be nothing. Yeah. Okay, I think I'll save my next questions for the following slides. Thank you.
So stem wall out, would that be fair, Mayor? Is that how you understood it? Expenses of stem wall out are on the city.
That's what it sounds like roof, and I'm guessing fences and HVAC and probably big plumbing, but it sounds like sweeping of the floors and taking out of the trash and the smaller routine maintenance will be handled by the society. Correct me if I'm wrong.
With our city attorney on the line, we can absolutely add clarification, so there are no surprises or arguments later down the road.
All right, moving on to slide 7. So this is a point that city manager already addressed, was that 2 city council liaisons will be members of the society's board.
I have a question about that. So I always like to say that Norman residents care about 3 things: trees, recycling, and animals. And if we're going to, I don't know what the fate of the Norman Animal Welfare Oversight Committee would be, but it would seem like this would take its place. I would like to have a citizen voice on that, but I don't know what the makeup of the society's board of directors is. Is that something we could negotiate? I obviously understand why Chief Foster would need to be on there in terms of his role, and obviously our city attorney as well. But I really think knowing how passionate our residents are about this issue, I think there is a needed space for a citizen voice.
Yes, I think they would be definitely open to that.
Okay. So that's something that especially again, have there been discussions about what happens with the Norman Animal Welfare Oversight? Because I assume this supersedes it, but it doesn't say it anywhere in here. So I'm just going to ask.
We have discussed it with them, and we're clear from their side that this would not have any effect on Oklahoma Humane, but like Councilmember Patron was referencing earlier, they can still advise on references, changes to ordinances and things like that if you maintain that committee.
I don't know how we could call it an oversight committee though at that point, because what exactly would we have oversight of? So, and I know with lots of boards and commissions have gone back and forth about oversight and advisory. So that is something I would want fleshed out, and to have some at least input on the society. I will strongly advocate that we have one of those two spots be for a citizen, or we get a third one. But then we would need to revisit the nature and role of our animal welfare oversight committee as it stands now.
You have a question from Councilmember Holman.
Okay, thank you. So one of the issues that, and Mayor Clark asked the main question that I had. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the answer. So when it comes to recycling service, for example, it's not uncommon that the city is who residents call when there's a problem, a complaint with the service, something along those lines. So that, amounts to some kind of cost to the city for having to answer the complaints and pass that along, or whatever we got to do to be the middle person there. So how will that be handled in this agreement?
That's why we have kept Mark on our side and kept his pay within our budget to pay him to do those type of things and administrative things on our side of this.
Okay, that's good. That's what I was hoping to hear, because I think it's good to have somebody that, that's a go-to for that, I guess I should say, when we're contracting out a service to a private company. And there, from what I can tell, correct me if I'm wrong, there's no real loss of oversight compared to what we currently have. I mean, it's still our facility. It's going to be operated by City of Norman ordinances, correct? Or I'm wondering how the policy of the OK Humane Society and City of Norman policy and ordinances, how those go along. If the city council decides we want to do something different as far as a policy, which we've done recently, maybe we do something that other cities don't do, or we don't do something that other cities do. Is that compatible with them?
Yes, it's within the agreement that they will work within our city ordinances. And I think it will say something to the effect, when we go to change an ordinance, we will at least consult with them about it.
Okay. And are they, just for clarification, they are a private company, they're not a nonprofit, or they are a nonprofit?
I believe they're a nonprofit.
I believe that is true. And Your Honor, we asked them specifically about minimum insurance requirements to name the City of Norman as an additionally insured. And they said, based on their operations, they have a very impressive and robust insurance program for all of their services and all of the agreements under which they operate. So I think we would be in very good hands. I do believe they are a 501 C, whether it's a 3 or a 6 or whatever the designation is, but they do qualify for those tax exempt donations.
Okay. And let's see, staff was answered. Building responsibility, that was answered. I agree about the oversight committee. At least the 3 mayors that I've served with, Rosenthal, Miller, and now Clark, have talked about what the role of not only that committee, but several others should be, clarifying what those roles are. Council, we have talked about it in somewhat recent history, within this past year at least, about clarifying some of that. I know that the Animal Welfare Oversight Committee, from what I understand, was really initially supposed to be a temporary committee, but kind of turned into a longstanding committee. And I think it's good for the city council to have citizens advising us on policy that we might be considering, or policy we don't know about that they think we should consider. So I would definitely want to make sure we still do have citizen involvement in the form of some, either changing it to officially being called an advisory board, but I would think they'd be directly involved, as in some of our other committees are, in helping us develop policy to provide better service in this area. So I would definitely hope to see that board still exist to help the city council. So based on the slides we've seen so far, my questions have now been answered. Thank you.
Okay, we have Councilmember Hall.
Okay, yeah, so many questions have been covered already. I did want to ask, because this agreement would be with the Oklahoma Humane Society, correct? And are they under the umbrella of a national organization?
I'm not sure if they're under a national organization, but it is the Oklahoma Humane. They changed their name to OK Humane, I believe, to start the move towards statewide services.
They are not a state affiliate of a national organization.
Okay. Well, we've mentioned some national options about where animals might be adopted. So that's why I was curious about that. And then where do they currently have public-private partnerships in Oklahoma?
They do gather animals from other animal control operations for their adoption program. The model we're looking at would be the first of its kind in their portfolio, but this is the model they're hoping to roll out with other municipalities in the metro. They saw value in it when we put it forward, but this will be the first of its kind.
In Oklahoma.
Yeah, they have a smaller city that they run the services for, but it's a very small city. I just can't remember which one it is.
The Village.
The Village.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, so we really are in uncharted territory as far as all of how the agreement's going to look at the end, I guess.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. And then I also wanted to get back to the issue of our current City of Norman employees, because this is something that I heard about quite a bit when I was campaigning for City Council. And so you mentioned that there were potentially 10 shelter employees that might have the opportunity to move to the Oklahoma Humane Society employment rather than the City of Norman. Did I get that right?
I think Mark can go with those numbers better on what employees are down there, but I would think like the vet tech, and then all the shelter employees.
Okay. And then we also mentioned that there would be some opportunities perhaps within the City of Norman for alternate positions. Did I hear that right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just wondering, if you've had any kind of discussions about what that might look like, or, you know, if the benefit package would be similar, would they be guaranteed a spot, or would they have to be interviewed just like everybody else?
I think they would have to be
That far?
interviewed. I think they'd be interviewed like other people.
Okay,
They'd obviously have the experience that they have here, so that would be in
Yes.
their favor.
yes,
And the benefits package, they have their standard benefits that all their employees get at Oklahoma Humane, which they would get. And
Okay.
then their pay would range on the duties that they have.
okay, okay. So if they chose to go that route, and they were not selected for a position, would we be proactive in trying to get them reassigned or to help them find other employment? How would that work?
Your Honor, the one of the opportunities that is available to them is the fact that we have been in a hiring freeze since November. And we do have positions, these wouldn't be hires, they would just be transfers from one budget to another. So there are a variety of vacancies that we would fill with existing employees that still fall well within the guidelines of our hiring freeze. So lots of opportunities in several different divisions. And, you know, they've already got a track record with us. We already understand their work experience and their work ethic.
Okay, I just know that there was a lot of uncertainty back in January, way before we have the now COVID effects. So I just wanted to address some of those things. So thank you for all that information. Then I'm just curious, the $35 fee that we would be paying to the Humane Society, what is the purpose of that?
We broke the funding up in two categories: the fixed amount to cover fixed cost, and then the variable amount to cover the operational cost of the shelter while an animal is inside the facility for covers the cost of food and any medications or treatments they may get before they get sent out into the adoption arena. And we kind of looked at it the way we operate currently. We understand we have fixed costs and we have some variable costs, and we tried to structure our current revenue package in similar form and format, recognizing the 400,000 available to cover employee expenses, and then the variable comes, basically driven by the number of animals we bring through the door from our field operations. So that funding proposal just seemed to fit the revenue streams as we currently see it in our current expenditure patterns. The bigger volume, the more expenses they'll incur. So that $35 fee would be commensurate to the volume of activity they may experience in any given year.
Okay, thank you. And then I also just wanted to add that I also have an interest in the oversight role and how that's going to be evolving going forward. But that's the questions I have for now. Thank you very much.
With that, we'll probably have to wrap up for tonight, since we do have a meeting at 6:30, at least on this topic. So I can request that it is on the agenda for continued discussion next Tuesday. And with the guidance and feedback and questions that we've asked tonight, hopefully both Chief Foster and our city manager and our city attorney can move forward with kind of addressing some of those things for next week. Brenda, is there anything to add to that?
No, ma'am. Although some of the council members did have their hands up to talk again, that wanted to speak, may go ahead and share any comments or questions they may have with the city manager, so that can be covered as well next Tuesday.
Okay, please do so quickly. We've got a few minutes.
No, I mean, but via email.
Perfect. I was like, wow, that's ambitious, Brenda. Okay. You heard that. Please make sure that you send your final thoughts and questions for now to City Manager Pyle, and he can make sure those are incorporated and addressed, at least in some part, before our next discussion on Tuesday. So with that, let's take a 2-minute break, and then we will turn your cameras off and your mics off, and we will resume at 6:30 for our regular council meeting.
Thank you, Mark.
Yep, thank you.
All right. I see some of us back. My apologies for my own delay. There's Councilmember Carter, Bierman, Wilson, Patrone, Hall, Scanlon. Councilmember Scott has let us know that she has had an issue come up that she has to address immediately, so she may not be back on tonight. But I don't see Councilmember Holman. If we have him, I think we can begin.
Ooh, and I gotta apologize in advance for how I may sound tonight. I don't know what is blowing through the air, but I've been sneezing like every 30 seconds and my nasal passages are on fire right now. So sorry.
I hear you. Okay, I saw Councilmember Holman. Brenda, are you ready for us then?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, then we are going to go ahead and begin. Good evening and welcome to the City Council, Norman Utilities Authority, Norman Municipal Authority, and Norman Tax Increment Finance Authority meeting of May 26, 2020. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Bierman,
Here.
Councilmember Carter,
Here.
Councilmember Patrone,
Present.
Councilmember Hall,
Here.
Councilmember Wilson,
Here.
Councilmember Scanlon,
Here.
Councilmember Holman,
Here.
Councilmember Scott, and Mayor Clark.
Here. All right, with that, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
Which it stands.
one nation, under
nation,
God,
under God,
indivisible, with
indivisible,
liberty
with
and
liberty,
justice for all.
justice for all.
There's an
Yeah,
echo in here.
Yeah, in the future, maybe I'll just say it and you guys can like lip sync along, or I don't know, maybe some of this. Yeah, that's fun. All right, before we move forward, I would like to make a brief statement. Item 23 on tonight's agenda is a public hearing regarding the FYE 2021 City of Norman budget. Public input can be provided now by sending an email to the city clerk at cityclerk@normanok.gov or by sending comments via social media. Staff will be monitoring those sites and will read questions and comments into the record. Obviously, you can submit questions or comments during or after the presentation, but we want to make it very clear that you can go ahead and do so now if you have questions or comments. So with that, we'll move on to item 3, the consent docket. This item is placed on the agenda so that the City Council, by unanimous consent, can designate those routine agenda items that they wish to be approved or acknowledged by one motion. I need a motion to place items 4 through 22 on the consent docket.
So second.
Okay. The motion on the floor is to place items 4 through 22 on the consent docket. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Bierman,
Aye.
Councilmember Carter,
Aye.
Councilmember Patrone,
Brenda, point of information, there will be a opportunity to ask questions about certain items.
absolutely, yes.
Okay, aye.
Councilmember Hall,
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson,
I have a point of information. I need to recuse on item 15. When do I do that?
she'll call on you after she reads, before we make the motion to approve. So,
Aye.
okay. Councilmember Scanlon,
Aye.
Councilmember Holman,
Yes.
and Mayor Clark.
Yes.
The consent docket, to place items 4 through 22 on the consent docket passes unanimously.
Thank you. Item 4, approval of the City Council, Norman Utilities Authority, Norman Municipal Authority, and Norman Tax Increment Finance Authority minutes of May 12, 2020. Item 5, ordinance 1920-62 upon first reading, authorizing a special election on August 25th, 2020 to submit to the registered voters the question of issuance of general obligation bonds in an amount to not exceed $89,800,000 to be issued in one or more series to provide funds to construct, reconstruct, expand, repair, which may also include improving, renovating, acquiring, and equipping parks, recreational and community facilities, and related public art installations, all to be owned exclusively by the city, all to be completed with or without the use of other funds, and levying and collecting an annual tax upon all taxable property for the payment of interest and principal, providing for election procedures, and declaring an emergency. Item 6, Ordinance 1920-63 upon first reading, authorizing a special election on August 25th, 2020 to submit to the registered voters the question of issuance of general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $24,300,000 to be issued in one or more series to provide funds to construct, reconstruct, expand, repair, which may also include improving, renovating, acquiring, and equipping municipal services facilities, all to be owned exclusively by the city, all to be completed with or without the use of other funds, and levying and collecting an annual tax upon all taxable property for the payment of interest and principal, providing for election procedures, and declaring an emergency. Item 7, Ordinance 1920-64 upon first reading, authorizing the calling and holding of a special election on August 25th, 2020 to submit to the registered voters the question of issuance of general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $5 million to be used for economic and community development, including job retention and creation programs, all to be completed with or without the use of other funds, and levying and collecting an annual tax upon all taxable property for the payment of interest and principal, providing for election procedures, and declaring an emergency. Item 8, submission of the proposed nominations for reappointment of David Porch as presiding judge, Gail Blaylock and Drew Nichols as associate judges, and Christy Chesley as acting judge of the Municipal Criminal Court, each for a term beginning July 1, 2020 and ending June 30, 2022. Item 9, Finance Director's Investment Report as of April 30th, 2020. Item 10, Monthly Departmental Reports for the month of April 2020. Item 11, the City Manager's Change Order Report. Item 12, authorization for the purchase of hardware upgrades for the onboard intelligent transportation system from GMV Synchromatics in the amount of $145,372 for the city's fixed route public transportation fleet. Item 13, declaration of surplus and or obsolete equipment and materials and authorizing the sale or disposal thereof. Item 14, acceptance of a donation in the amount of $500 from Shelter Animals Count to be used at the Norman Animal Welfare Center. Item 15, acceptance of a generous donation in the amount of $11,933.55 from Annie's Rescue Foundation to be used at the Norman Animal Welfare Center. Item 16, final acceptance and final payment of contract 1819-126 with McKee Utility Contractors Incorporated for the Robinson Waterline project from the water treatment plant to 24th Avenue Northeast. Item 17, change order number 1 to contract 1920-4 with Matthews Trenching Company Incorporated, decreasing the contract amount by $6,380 for a revised contract price of $573,595 and extending the contract time by 60 calendar days for the Summit Valley Interceptor project and final acceptance of the project. Item 18, contract 1920-53 with Valerie Thieberg in the amount of $40,000 for the design, fabrication, and installation of public art in conjunction with the Ruby Grant Park project. Item 19, resolution 1920-88, fixing the amount of general obligation bonds series 2020A to mature each year, fixing the time and place the bonds are to be sold, designating a paying agent registrar, approving the preliminary official statement and distribution thereof, and authorizing the clerk to give notice of said sale as required by law and fixing other details of the issue. Item 20, resolution 1920-113, appropriating funds from Community Parkland Fund to pay for completion of the accessible and inclusive playground at Ruby Grant Park. Item 21, resolution 1920-116, accepting and adopting the hazard mitigation plan that includes the city of Norman and is managed by the Cleveland County Emergency Management Office. Item 22, resolution 1920-118, supporting fair, direct federal emergency support to reopen and rebuild local American economies. A resolution of the Council of the City of Norman, Oklahoma, supporting fair, direct federal emergency support to reopen and rebuild local American economies. Whereas American cities, towns, and villages face unprecedented threats to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic emergency. And whereas municipalities are essential to America's economic recovery, and without funding support for local governments, municipalities may go from being a critical part of the economic solution to becoming a major obstacle to long-term stabilization and recovery. And whereas American cities, towns, and villages will experience budgetary shortfalls of up to $134 billion in fiscal year 2020 alone, and the negative effects of the pandemic emergency on local communities will continue long after this year. And whereas 3 million critical municipal worker jobs are at risk, threatening cuts to basic community services, including 911 response, sanitation, and maintenance. And whereas communities have taken extraordinary measures to protect health, safety, and the continuation of essential services throughout this emergency. And whereas cities in Oklahoma rely heavily on sales tax revenue for operational expenses. And because of the extraordinary measures taken to protect the public health while continuing to provide essential services to our residents, the city of Norman is anticipating unprecedented revenue shortfalls. And whereas America's rural communities and small towns are struggling just as much as big cities and risk being left behind or wiped out entirely. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Council of the City of Norman, Oklahoma, that Congress is urged to allocate fair and direct federal support to all of America's communities, regardless of population size, and that this funding must be flexible and address not only the additional expenses incurred by communities to respond to the pandemic emergency, but also the dramatic budgetary shortfalls resulting from pauses in commerce, tourism, and other economic engines. And that local governments will ensure federal funds are immediately used to rebuild and reopen the national economy. And that funding will keep middle-class workers employed and critical services operating. And that Norman has been part of the emergency response and now calls on Congress to build a united national partnership for a safe, healthy, prosperous life. I need a motion to approve or reject the consent docket.
So moved.
Second.
I'd like to recognize Councilmember Wilson for an abstention on item 15.
So thank you, Mayor Clark. As you all may be aware, I serve as the executive director and am the founder of Annie's Rescue Foundation. Ooh, I have some feedback, sorry. And out of abundance of caution, the spirit of transparency, and to avoid an appearance of conflict of interest, I'm going to recuse my vote on item 15.
I need a motion to allow Councilmember Wilson to abstain from item 15.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
The motion on the floor is to allow Councilmember Wilson to abstain from item 15. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Bierman,
Aye.
Councilmember Carter,
Aye.
Councilmember Petrone,
Aye.
Councilmember Hall,
Aye.
Councilmember Scanlon,
Aye.
Councilmember Holman,
Yes.
Mayor Clark.
Yes.
The motion is approved unanimously.
Thank you. Are there any comments from council regarding any item on the consent docket? Please raise your hand if you have a comment.
Councilmember Petrone has a comment.
Okay.
Okay, so with respect to the bond elections, I have some questions and comments, generally speaking, to figure out and be on the record as to, the process here. One question that's been asked of me, and I was hoping that City Legal could speak to this for a moment, is why council has to call special elections and why municipal issues are not held on the same November ballots as typical presidential elections or state elections. And to that, generally speaking, what months can city elections be held?
Happy to answer that. It depends on the type of election. So if it's a election for a office, a ward position, those are required to be held in the spring because the term of the office starts in July. That's something the Charter Commission has looked at even recently, and I believe the recommendation is to make some tweaks to that, but not move it to a November election at this point. Council has the ability to set the election at any time for other issues. It just depends on the timing and the need and where the state election board or when the state election board is allowing us to set elections. The months available in even years such as 2020 are much more limited than odd numbered years, where you can have an election almost every month, I believe. And it really just depends on what the election board allows us to have. There's a lot of federal law that plays into that and some other state laws related to letting I think it's called Let the Troops Vote Act. We've had to update our charter a couple times to comply with that.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that we can't just set everything to take place on a November ballot?
Everything meaning these
Any
items
city
or
related- any city related issue, whether it's a ward election or a mayoral election or a water rate or a bond. Can they all, I mean, is it possible even that they can all go on a general election ballot, share a ballot with federal questions and state questions?
the ward offices cannot go on a November election without a change to the charter. Other elections can be set as allowed by the election board. And this year, November, I believe, isn't available month for an election.
Okay, so the second, generally speaking, what the mayor just read off with respect to these bonds. So that I assume A is not the ballot, the set in stone ballot language, and B, it's not the set in stone ordinance. So that because this is first reading, it doesn't mean that that is how it's going to read at the ballot or how the ordinance would read in the end.
That's correct. First reading's just for notice. And so on second reading is where you all will be having your discussion, taking public comments, and if you desire, make amendments on the floor.
Okay, so this is just more kind of notice of this topic is proceeding, but it's not for right now, but that's not going to be how it necessarily looks when you go to vote.
Right, council may choose that second reading.
What the mayor read tonight, Councilmember Patron, is just the title of the ordinance. The actual proposition that will be on the ballot is in the body of the ordinance. So that is not exactly how it will read on the ballot.
Right, that's what I was trying to, thank you. And then I have, many concerns about a whole lot of this. So I'm gonna, hold most of that for second reading. But I mostly wanted to be able to just, let people know on the record that, and with respect to the Norman Forward, to the question, to the economic bond question, I think that we owe notice to the people to understand what some of these, to define what some of this means. What is economic and community development? Can that be city Wi-Fi into rural areas that, isn't able to receive Wi-Fi right now? Is that community development? Affordable housing, is that community development? What does this mean? And are we going to set the parameters that council has asked for? Because there's no mention of, minority owned businesses or disadvantaged businesses receiving preferential treatment at all. We haven't, so I'm just, at this point, it seems really, really vague. And if this was what was before me, I think it's too vague. I would not vote for it. And I'm just hoping that at some point, and I'd like to know when, we'll be able to have a conversation about the proposition language, because I think that that's going to be really important, especially for the Norman Forward questions and the economic development questions. And I have many notes, but I'm not going to go through all of that this evening because this is first reading. So just I guess we need to schedule another study session. That's what I've got.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there any other comments? I believe Councilmember Carter wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, staff, for drafting resolution number 22. It was worded beautifully, and I think it really calls attention to what our needs are going to be there as a city and as a country. I think we're just in the initial phases of this recession. And the most important vehicle getting out of these recessions, in my opinion, as a businessman that's rode the wave of these things more than one time, is employment. And back to our economic development component, I know our survey listed the highest priority among Norman business owners as access to capital. And I would make the argument that this is an evolving concept that is changing daily, weekly, and that the survey even today might show a little different result than what it did then. But I think we just came out with unemployment figures for Oklahoma. I think it was 14.6%. Nationally, they're talking like a 20% unemployment rate. The final component, we've got CARES Act 4, I think we're talking about, where we hopefully will get aid to cities like ours that have had major impact. We take about a 5% hit in April, if I remember right, a little over $300,000 hit in sales tax revenue compared to last year. These are going to be problems that are going to continue over time, and employment will be the vehicle that we ride out of this. And public sector employment will be probably the horse that we gallop out on. And I hope that our anybody listening tonight, our fellow city council members, this is a serious thing that we need to talk to our congressmen and senators about, and make sure that not only do we get reimbursed like we did in the first CARES Act, but any money that's left over is then allowed to be used for cities to offset these budget deficits so that we can maintain employment, and then subsequent measures that are passed by Congress and addressed by Congress do exactly what this exceptional resolution talked about tonight. So thank you, Mayor. Thank you, staff. Thank you, City Council. To me, this is a very, very big deal. So thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there any other comments or questions regarding any item on the consent docket?
Councilmember Holman has a question or comment.
Thank you. I just wanted to expand for a moment on the election date stuff because the state law has changed during the time that I've been on council, maybe in the time that Mayor Clark has been on council as well. But it was a preemption law, another one of those that significantly limited the dates available for municipalities to hold elections at all for anything. And one of the things that we really discussed heavily on council back then was we wanted to make sure city council elections could be a consistent date every year. So I, for example, was a very big proponent of city council elections happening the same month every year. So people could just put it on the calendar and mark it down and count on city council election every whatever month in the spring. Well, ideally, for me anyway, April was that ideal month, March or April, but I prefer April with a May runoff, but we're not allowed to do that. An April election would be what are we looking at now? A September runoff is what we were talking about. Yeah, so, and that goes past the date in our city charter in which city council members have to be seated. So that didn't work. And so February was actually the only month that we're allowed to have an election, and it be the same month every year. So that's why city council elections now have to be just in February, unless we wanted to have runoffs that were several months later potentially. And then we'd have to change the city charter to seat council members after September, and it just changed everything. And in November, we only have federal elections every 2 years. And I know that there's a lot of city business that can't wait 2 years. And if we did that, we'd have to put a whole lot of stuff on there, I think. Multiple city issues would have to be on that ballot, along with president and Congress and Senate and whatever state questions and state judge retention, all that type of stuff would also be on there. I believe city issues would be drowned out in an issue like on a ballot like that. But especially in Norman, since we are the only city in the state still that requires a public vote for all utility rate increases, we have to vote more often than any other city. And if we were only able to do it every 2 years, I would see that probably being very problematic for future leaders of the city. So this change in state law really hampered our ability to decide when we think is best to have elections in our city. And so all I would add about August is that it is a federal election. It's a runoff for federal and state elections in August. So yeah, that's kind of the situation we're in due to state law, in my opinion. So that's all I have to add. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Again, we talk about voter fatigue, how many times we go to the polls. Ballot fatigue is also an issue, which I'm concerned about. So we can definitely discuss that more. And unfortunately, we are, again, limited in our options based on no fault of our own of when we would like to do these things, which has been a common theme with our state legislature. But are there any other comments from council regarding the consent agenda?
I'm seeing none, Mayor.
Okay, I will, well, we already have a motion on the floor, and the motion on the floor is to approve the consent docket. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Actually, Mayor, we need another motion. The motion we just did was the abstention. So if we could do another motion to approve.
Oh, I thought we had a motion before
Oh,
that.
we do have one. We do have one. I'm sorry, never mind.
Oh, and I would also like to make a correction. An amount I had said earlier, I was notified that was actually incorrect in my script. It's 90,620,000 for item 5. So I think I've joked about, with my student loans, what's another million? But I want to be crystal clear on what we're voting on. So with that, I would go ahead and please call the roll.
Councilmember Bierman.
Aye.
Councilmember Carter.
Aye.
Councilmember Patron.
Aye.
Councilmember Hall.
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson.
Yes.
Councilmember Scanlon.
Aye.
Councilmember Holman.
Yes.
Mayor Clark.
Yes.
The consent docket is approved unanimously.
Thank you. This item 23 is our one item off consent, and it is our second public hearing regarding the FYE 2021 City of Norman proposed operating and capitals budget. I will entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. The motion on the floor is to open the public hearing. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Bierman.
Aye.
Councilmember Carter.
Aye.
Councilmember Patron. Councilmember Patron.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Hall.
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson.
Yes.
Councilmember Scanlon.
Aye.
Councilmember Holman.
Yes.
Mayor Clark.
Yes.
The public hearing is now open.
Before we begin, I would like to once again remind everyone watching from whatever media you are watching from that public input can be provided by sending an email to the city clerk at cityclerk@normanok.gov or by sending comments via social media. Staff will be monitoring those sites and will read questions and or comments into the records. With that said, are there any public comments?
Mayor, I'm sorry, Kim Kaufman is going to make a brief presentation.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. I do have a brief presentation. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, so it is the second public budget hearing. Our first public budget hearing was on April 14th. Nothing has changed since our first public budget hearing. Any changes to the proposed budget will be made by council amendment at the June 9th meeting when the council considers the budget for adoption. So here's a schedule of our budget process so far. We're here at the 5/26 public budget hearing, the second one. There's an optional follow-up on June 2nd. And then, as I said, the council will consider the budget for adoption on June 9th. The budget summary, which is a summary of proposed revenues and expenditures by type, was published in the April 6th and May 17th editions of the Norman Transcript for public review. Projected revenues for all funds for fiscal year 21 are just over 225 million. Sales tax is, of course, the largest piece of this. This is a 15.5% decrease from the fiscal year 2020 original budget, due in large part to bond proceeds that were received in the current fiscal year, which are not budgeted for fiscal year 21. Projected total expenditures for all funds for the fiscal year ending 2021 are just under $281 million. Capital improvements account for the largest chunk of expenditures, as you can see here. This is about a 6% increase over the original budget for the current fiscal year, mostly due to increases in debt service and increases in the service maintenance category of expenditures from the new transit program. Just remember, the transit program was not in the original 2020 budget. General fund revenues are projected to be $85,902,710, and 60% of that is sales tax. This is about a 1% increase from the estimates for the current fiscal year, mainly attributable to projected increases in internal charges and use tax. Sales tax projections were budgeted at about 1.9% over current year estimates. Use tax was projected at 4% over current year estimates. General fund expenditures were budgeted at $84,926,863 for fiscal year 2021, representing a 7% decrease from estimated expenditures in the current fiscal year. This decrease derives mainly from a decrease in capital equipment expenditures compared to the current fiscal year. The budget documents for the fiscal year ending 2021 can be found under financial services on the city's website. And that concludes my brief presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kaufman. Now, are there any public comments?
None so far, Mayor. We do have a couple of council comments, and we may be able to come back to public if we have a little bit of a delay.
We do.
Okay.
Then let's go ahead and do that, so we're not just sitting here staring at each other. So what council members have comments?
Councilmember Bierman, start with you.
Okay.
This question might be for Anthony. Refresh my memory. I know that our sales tax receipts lag a couple months from the months they were collected. So for the current fiscal year, when we are estimating an increase in revenue, mostly related to fines or other sources of revenue, are the potential drops in tax revenue from this spring going to impact next year's budget Or do we track the sales tax receipts for the next fiscal year actually starting when they roll in and not when they were collected? Please tell me that made sense, because it almost didn't make sense in my head when I said it.
No, I understood what you were saying, Councilman. And it impacts both. We make projections for the full fiscal year as the budget is being adopted. When this proposed budget was put together, we had some inkling that there would be some impact of COVID, which we built in with a minor reduction in our projected increase in sales tax revenue from 2% to 1.75%. We may be revisiting that. It so happens that we will get our June sales tax, which reflects sales during the month of April, which is the first full month of national strategies to shelter in place and to slow the spread of COVID-19. And that will be reflected in that sales tax, and that may cause us to make some revisitation of that 1.75, even lower. Even as we get in the fiscal year, though, we'll continue to monitor that, particularly as it relates both to sales tax and to room tax. When we have a clear indication of whether there will be a football season with fans in the stands, which will impact greatly on our room tax revenues. And we won't know that until the budget has been adopted and we're into next fiscal year, but we may come back to council with some revisions, particularly to our room tax projections. So it's a moving target.
Okay, so one clarification and then one follow-up question. The clarification is that, so for our fiscal year budget that starts July 1, the sales tax receipts that come in July, which will be for May, those are part of next year's budget and not this year's. So it's when we receive the money, not when the money was collected, correct?
That's correct. Okay.
And then the follow-up question is there any historic precedent in the city for what happens when our room tax revenue falls off a cliff? So have we been through this at all before, and what mechanism, is there a mechanism to either make that fund whole, or do we just say, them's the breaks, let's figure out how to bridge the gap? Have we ever been through that before? And if so, what processes are in place to handle it?
We've certainly been through recessions, which impacted on room tax. We've certainly been through the 9/11 decline, if you will. I don't know if you want to say falling off the cliff, but for certainly a extended period, there was an impact on travel and tourism related to 9/11. So yes, there are built into our room tax histories some of those effects. I can't say that we have ever had a local impact such that we would experience if there were to be no football season with fans in the stands. To a college town like Norman, that would be unprecedented. And we would definitely have to adjust.
Yeah, my big concern, the room tax, funds some parks and funds arts and, funds Visit Norman. So, I certainly don't want to see their operations so badly impacted. So I don't know what, if anything, we can do about it now. I guess we're going to have to wait and see how bad it really gets. But, especially for arts organizations, that's a huge blow to them. So, I don't know if there is anything that we can do about it or plan for, but I do think it's something we need to keep in mind as a council and as a community.
It would certainly be within council's purview to appropriate any room tax fund balance. And it would be within council's purview to appropriate general fund revenues to subsidize the room tax operations if you chose to. That would also be kind of unprecedented, though.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there any other comments?
Councilmember Petrone. I'm having trouble unmuting. There you go.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony, Mr. Francisco. On the hotel motel tax, Mr. City Manager Pyle had suggested that ours was extremely low compared, or at least noticeably low, even with our most recent increase compared to other areas. And I don't know if that was just in the Oklahoma or if that was nationwide or what exactly, but that is something that is income and revenue that's generated for the city of Norman that is not paid by Norman taxpayers. So if we're going to be going to the voters in August, is that something that we also could be asking the voters to raise the room tax allocation, percentage? That way we're not asking.
I'm not sure that you could give adequate notice for an August election because that's why first reading for this August election on the general obligation bonds was before council tonight. I think this will be kind of the last night that council could act on that for an August election. But certainly you could, within your purview, propose a room tax increase in the future. I think what City Manager Powell was referring to was our room tax rate is kind of at the lower end of average nationally. It's kind of in the middle regionally, certainly lower than Oklahoma City's, but certainly at or above the level of most of our surrounding cities that we compete with for hotel motel revenues. And I know that there's a proposal for a TID district, and Brenda will correct me if I have the term wrong, but it would act very similar to a room tax increase.
I'm sorry, can you expand on that a little bit?
I'll defer to Brenda, who is a member of the Convention of Visitors Bureau Board.
This is something the Visit Norman Board has looked at in the past when we first started Norman Forward about creating a tourism improvement district that would be an additional tax on the hotel room nights that would go to pay for a sports commission to have dollars available to market these new Norman Forward facilities to bring in teams. And that would be, that commission would function under the Visit Norman umbrella, but these dollars that the hotels would self-tax themselves for would go directly to marketing of those sports tourism. And that's something that Visit Norman will be bringing before council, depending on the passage of the upcoming elections over the next couple of months.
Okay, all right, so that seems like a side kind of bar. All right, well, I guess I would encourage taking a look at that, since we, again, it's not the wallets of our people. So, and especially if you're saying it's lower than even Oklahoma City. And then on the short-term rentals, we've gone over that ad nauseum. Is that something we have to go to the voters ultimately to approve that tax, or is that something that we just need to vote on here at council?
That's something the council would just need to vote on. Again, we believe that our current room tax ordinance applies to short-term rentals, and council is discussing the zoning problems and that sort of thing related to the proposal, but the taxing portions, I think, are very clear cut.
Okay.
Council member, they're currently on schedule to come before council in July, so that they would be in effect before football season. Hoping that we have one.
That's good news. Okay. And then is there any update on scheduling for the TIF referendum?
I'll take that one. It's not been scheduled yet. We haven't learned yet whether the Supreme Court will retain jurisdiction on the matter or whether they will send it out to one of the appellate panels. The 4 mayors filed several things on Friday, their response to the petition in error, of course, but also a motion asking for the court to put this on their fast track docket and to retain jurisdiction. So both of those things I think are positive moves to get this heard sooner rather than later, but we have not got a date set for that yet. I do think the Mr. Ellis's response to their motions is due by June 5th. So I think based on how that goes, it could move after.
There was a,
go ahead, sir.
there was something received today that hasn't been, Catherine hasn't seen it yet, but it was Mr. Ellis's answers to that.
Okay, and I assume that stuff will get sent to council. And then Mr. Francisco, does this budget that we're having the second hearing on, does it assume that those TIF dollars are going back into the general fund?
Yes, ma'am.
And does it also assume that this year's TIF dollars, fiscal year ending June 30th, 2020, that will it balance without those TIF dollars?
Well,
Or is there a plan in place to make it balance?
again, starting back when the original petition was filed, the city manager directed austerity measures to build up our fund balance such that we could absorb that loss. But yes, the projected budget for fiscal year 20 and for fiscal year 21 assumes that the sales taxes generated in the University of North Park development will be recorded to the general fund and the capital fund.
Okay, but we have a plan B in place for this calendar year that we're currently in, and
For this fiscal year, our plan B is to absorb it with fund balance.
okay, and we don't have a plan B for next year? Well, I guess it's done in December, huh?
Correct.
No, it's the fiscal year starts July 1st. So,
No,
so
I'm saying that the tip would reach full maturity in December of 21, so it would be, am I understanding that correctly? When would, under the 2008 plan, when would it reach full maturity such that,
well, because sales taxes have come in a bit slower, it would be more like April of next year before it would fully fund the 2008 project plan.
so it will still though be within the next year's, this year, this second meeting that we're talking about the budget, it will fall within that same calendar year's budget. FYE 21.
We think it should be within FYE 21, but again, the unknown factor is the COVID impact, which is obviously reduced sales tax generation within University of North Park as well.
Sure, but we're talking about December to potentially April. So, but we're able to plan in those months, which is helpful. That is a plan B in and of itself, which is what I'm hearing you saying. We'll have time to make those adjustments if we need to.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct.
Okay, I think that the only other question I have was regarding the interfund transfers that were on the spreadsheet. But I think I'd like to hear maybe from the public comments first and see what they have to say.
Thank you, Councilmember. Do we have any public comments at this time?
We do have one public comment, one moment.
Sorry about that delay. We do have a public comment from Cynthia Rogers. It says, could you please explain the situation with the water fund? It looks like operating expenditures are 7 million more than operating revenues. Is this a recent phenomenon? Also, could you explain the drop in the water reclamation fund? Is that in danger of going to zero?
As far as the water fund expenditures, they are in excess of revenues in the projected fiscal year because of the spend down of revenue bond funds, particularly for the water treatment plant improvements, The revenues were received in previous fiscal years and the expenditures will be ongoing into the next fiscal year. So annual expenditures are outweighing annual revenues next fiscal year in the water fund. As far as the water reclamation fund, I don't expect that it would be going to zero. That would be certainly beyond our most reasonable projections.
If I can answer some of that, is on the water reclamation fund, we have two big ticket items coming up next year. And one was we're going to plan for a laboratory redo because of the age of the laboratory and the new tests that we have to take with a new permit. And the second is a centrifuge, which is the sludge drying mechanism. Those will look like cash basis, but we would actually sell a bond for those and spread those costs over several years. So it just looks like it has a big hit. But when we actually go to buy it, it'll be like buying a car. We'll finance it for a number of years.
We have Councilmember Holman.
Thank you. Let's see, Anthony. One of the questions I ask, I think almost every year, because I see it asked a lot on social media, and I get asked in person a lot. How much revenue in the police department comes from writing speeding tickets or traffic violations, would you say?
Fines and forfeiture category revenues are about $2.5 million projected into the general fund. It's not specific to the police department. Fines and forfeitures do not operate like an enterprise fund. It's just a general fund revenue. So money in is about $2.5 million a year.
Of the total, not all of it goes to the police department, though, you're saying?
That's correct.
But that's not just tickets for speeding and traffic violations, though. That's all civil asset forfeiture, everything related to that, correct?
Moving violations, parking violations, all other municipal citations, yes.
Okay. I would think, just for clarity's sake, that just tickets, written tickets and moving violations alone, I don't think are a big enough portion of the police department's budget to merit a quota incentive. Would you agree?
No, it does not operate like an enterprise fund.
Okay. Just one of the questions I think is most common that we get about is the police writing tickets for quotas. I think in some places of our overall city budget, what percent is salaries and benefits of employees overall?
Overall, it's probably about 50%. In the general fund, it's about 80%, but in the utility enterprise, it's a lower percentage.
Okay. That's one of the questions I get a lot too. People wondering where the city's money goes or what we spend most of the city's money on, and it's people to provide services.
Yes, sir.
And we have a lot less of those people than most cities our size, I would add. I had the same question about how the TIF appeal impacts the current and proposed budget. I think you answered that. I guess maybe just one point of clarity would be the budget going forward from July 2020 to July 2021. It assumes a full year of tax increment coming to the general fund, though, correct?
Yes, sir.
So if the TIF didn't actually end until April or sometime in the spring, that would be almost a year's worth of shortfall we would have to come up with, correct?
Yes, sir.
So maybe a similar situation to what we're in right now.
Yes, sir. Now, the amount of money that it would take to fully fund the 2008 University of North Park TIF project plan is a set number. The variable is how long it would take to get there if we're not able to close out that TIF fund as the council passed the ordinance in November of 2019. So we know how much we would need. It's just that the amount to get there is coming in slower.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Other question. So we all know that OU football game day is a big economic driver, tourism, notoriety, Norman being on national television, all that type of stuff is generally good. I think we all agree with that. But I think we know too that there is a cost to an event like game day, the size of that, to take place. So there's a cost to the city for game day to happen in this town, for overtime, all that type of stuff, which I think you've mentioned before, OU does reimburse us a certain amount for that cost. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I would be interested to know if there are less home games, or if there is half the stadium, or whatever happens along those lines, what that would mean for us, as far as it may cost us a little bit less as far as people, but I don't know if the event's happening, whether it's 85,000 or 45,000. I would assume the people needed to put the event on would probably still be about the same as far as police and fire.
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt that it would be a net negative to the city's general fund and certainly room tax operations if there was a reduction in the number of fans in the stands. I actually had this conversation with a citizen on the street today. And I'm often asked over the years, what is the impact of a home football game? And I have always answered to say that it's very difficult to quantify that because our sales tax comes in monthly. It does not come in weekly or certainly by any weekend. But, I don't want to get the scientific data that we would get from not having a football season to quantify that. We know that it would be a big net negative.
I definitely agree. So that's something that I think we are hopefully taking into account as well. That could be hopefully the worst case scenario type thing. But that is one of the questions I hear a lot. Again, is people wondering, what is the economic impact of OU football game days, and does the city benefit as far as revenue wise? What does it cost us? That type of stuff. So, I always kind of like to ask those type of questions. And then if my math is right, it takes, based on the sales tax rate and the percent of that sales tax that the city gets is 4%. Is that right, Anthony?
4.5.
4.5. Okay, so my number is a little bit off, but I mean, it basically takes about $1 million of the public spending to generate $40,000 in revenue. Is that right?
Ooh, 40,000. I think that's right. Yes.
4% of $1 million. Yes. So, I mean, it takes a lot. I mean, $40,000 is like hardly a salary of an employee, So it takes a lot of spending to generate the type of money it takes to operate a city this size. And so it is just a little bit of perspective to think about when we're trying to think about the decisions that we're going to have to make and some of the scenarios that might play out with the way the economy was before COVID-19 and the way it might be going forward. So I appreciate the answers to the questions. Those are all the ones I have right now. And I I'm looking forward to the continued discussion about the budget. I hope some more members of the public. I appreciate Dr. Rogers sending us some questions in, but she's the only one so far. So hopefully some other people can chime in with some questions and interest in the city's budget. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there any other comments?
I see no other council comments or public comments.
I got a question.
Oh,
Councilmember
Carter.
Okay, Anthony, so if I remember right, we were running approximately 8% below budget on our expenditures due to the management that the city manager has implemented since our uncertainty began with this lawsuit. Are we still running about that?
Yes, sir. We again project that our ending fund balance will be in excess of our mandated operational reserve in the general fund, even accounting for the COVID effect as we project it right now, unless we have the double whammy of having to lose the University of North Park general sales tax revenues into the general fund.
Yeah, that's on the revenue side, but I thought we were still running under budget on expenditures, correct? For this fiscal year. Yeah.
Yes, sir, and that's why our fund balance is increasing.
Yeah. So I want to just pass my kudos on to you and your staff and the entire staff of the city for being so frugal during this important period of time. The uncertainty right now certainly is unprecedented. So my second question is a revenue question for the fiscal year 2021. And would it be fair to say that your calculation for the COVID effect, which is the combined anticipation or projection of the COVID effect on football games, not hotels, that's different, but on the general fund, was decreasing our growth by 0.25% from 2 to 1.75?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and is there anything in the April numbers that make you feel, anything you've seen so far that has made you less comfortable with that?
Again, it all depends on the duration of the downturn. You'll recall as we were presenting the budget to the council in the first of the 3 budget study sessions, we talked about a sort of a J-shaped or a saxophone-shaped recovery, that we did not think that the economy would recover to the level that it was pre-COVID, but that it would recover. And what will actually happen is unknown, but that's what our projections are based on right now.
So what would be a total gross figure in dollars for a 0.25 decrease in growth over a course of 1 year? What's that number? Is that 5 million, 2 million?
In the general fund, that would be about 2 million. Yeah.
Yeah, 2 million. And so that's about 150,000 a month, something like that, huh?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. And did I read it right that we got April sales tax figures in, and our revenue was 6.3, and last year it was 6.6, something like that, million?
We got our May sales tax remittance, which reflects collections at the cash register in March.
In March. Okay, that's March numbers. Okay. Gotcha. All right, that's all I got. Thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember.
Councilmember Patron.
Mr. Francisco, Councilmember Carter earlier brought up unemployment statistics for the state of Oklahoma, and I think you said it was just shy of 15%. Do we have any statistics or numbers for Cleveland County or Norman specifically?
I do not. I don't think that and unemployment statistics are tracked by city. I suspect that on a lagging basis, they are tracked by county.
Okay, and then on that, if we had any further breakdown as to what of that is COVID versus oil and gas situation. And on that, a follow-up question would be when we can expect to get another update from our financial advisor, the forecaster person that advises several cities, because I'd be curious what his thoughts are on the oil and gas side of it, if council needs to.
We have spoken with Dr. Evans. He gave quite a bit of information to us as well as to Oklahoma City. Now, Oklahoma City has a much more direct impact related to the oil and gas industry than Norman does, as you know, and we've talked about for many years. Norman sort of lags both on the upside and the downside impacts on the oil industry. So as we saw reflected in that May sales tax remittance, Norman was down 7.8%, but Oklahoma City was down by about 11%. So to the extent that the COVID effect is not being felt as much as the oil and gas effect, at least during the month of March, you saw that kind of work itself out, as it has over the last 30 years of history would teach us. So again, if there were no COVID effect, I'd be concerned about where we're going to be about 9 months to a year from now, but not so much right now. But the COVID effect is more immediate. And it so happens that we would expect to receive our June sales tax remittance that will reflect April right around June the 9th on the day that council will be considering the budget. And so we hope to be able to give some information then that might impact on our recommendation about whether we should revise our sales tax estimates now. But again, at least at this point, where we're working based on the assumptions that we made in April.
Thank you.
I'm seeing none other, Mayor.
All right, thank you, council member. Any other comments from the public?
We have none.
All right. At this time, I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. The motion on the floor is to close the public hearing. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Bierman.
Aye.
Councilmember Carter.
Aye.
Councilmember Patron.
Aye.
Councilmember Hall.
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson.
Yes.
Councilmember Scanlon.
Aye.
Councilmember Holman.
Yes.
Mayor Clark.
Yes.
The vote was unanimous and the public hearing is now closed.
Okay. This is our opportunity for miscellaneous discussion. This is an opportunity for citizens to address the city council. Remarks should be directed to council as a whole.
I believe we have one public comment, Mayor.
Okay.
We do have one miscellaneous comment from Casey Holcomb. Says, does council as a whole feel it is important to monitor racism, implicit or overt, within law enforcement departments? We can prevent incidents like Minneapolis here by being vigilant and vetting officers. that's all the miscellaneous comments I have.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other comments, we do have executive session. So council members, if you all would like to make comments before we exit into executive session, we can go ahead and do that. And since Councilmember Scott is not here, Councilmember Bierman, would you like to kick us off?
Yes, I will. So I don't have much today, but I am once again wearing my Save the Humans Oklahoma Blood Institute shirt today because the OBI is once again experiencing a critical blood shortage. Blood doesn't stop even though coronavirus continues, but they have reduced their hours at their locations, and also I think people are scared to go, but they do desperately need their blood. So there are going to be 2 blood drives at what they're calling the Norman Reeves Center. So I have a feeling it's at Reeves Park, says at Constitution and Jenkins. Tomorrow and Thursday, May 27th and May 28th from noon to 6 p.m. You do need an appointment. It's going to be at one of the Bloodmobile centers there. So you can schedule it on obi.org. However, I do also want to point out that every donor who goes to that blood drive can receive a free COVID-19 antibody test. So, keep in mind, the disclaimer, fine print, we don't really know exactly what that tells you, except whether or not you have antibodies that are likely related to COVID-19. But if you are at all interested in that, tomorrow, Wednesday, May 27th, and Thursday, May 28th, from noon to 6 p.m., OBI blood drive at Reeves Park. Please make an appointment. Please donate blood if you can. I am now at 63 days post-donation. So Councilmember Scanlon, that means you're probably right behind me in your eligibility. So everyone please go donate blood if you are able, or I should also put the caveat, if you are allowed to, because I know that OBI still has not completely adopted the new FDA regulations about LGBTQ blood donating. So that's pretty much all I have for today. Go donate blood. They really need it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Carter.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I didn't really give a comment on the study session, but I do feel like this is another example of Norman leading the way with a completely new business model for Oklahoma that would be something that we see across the nation. It's a really viable working relationship between the nonprofit and the city. So I'm very much in favor of moving forward with that. I think there's a lot of details to be worked out. I would ask the mayor, city manager, maybe the police chief, and any of you other city council members that have never done it, maybe to schedule a day, or not day, but 30 minutes, and go out and take a tour, and I'll set it up for you. I'm the volunteer medical director for Wild Care Foundation for the last decade or two. It runs together on me, but you cannot believe the service that organization provides to our city, and I'm very much interested in Oklahoma Humane recognizing the value in that, and the city of Norman recognizing the value in that, and continuing that relationship, because you're talking about outcomes and live release numbers that far exceed national averages for costs that are well below national averages. And so that's kind of a program that we can all get behind. And I'd be happy to, if you had an hour sometime, spur of the moment, I can set you up, go out there and see the wonderful job that those people do. So stay safe, everyone. Wear your masks. Peace out.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Patron.
So I don't have too much to say tonight. I'm looking forward to us all being able to safely meet in person again. And I follow up on the study session as well. I would say that as far as the oversight Committee is concerned, Mayor, I would be interested to hear their recommendations and or concerns that they may have with this idea of partnering with the Humane Society. This is their expertise and they've given a lot to this city. So I would be interested to hear what their recommendations are. And maybe we can alleviate concerns within the contract, or I don't know. I just would like to hear that. But anyway, I'm really not long-winded tonight. So see y'all in executive session.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Hall.
So it's my predictable moment to talk about the census. And the last I checked, we should be proud of ourselves because the participation rate for the state of Oklahoma is 53.7%, but Norman is surpassing that at 61.8%, but that still leaves a lot of opportunity to go fill out your census form that will have such positive impacts on our city going forward and our state as well. So please take advantage of the time you had. And I would love to report a significant jump in that percentage the next time that we meet. And I also just want to remind everybody that your vote is your voice. And I won't have this opportunity to remind those out listening to us tonight that you still have an opportunity to register to vote. The last day to register to vote for the June 30th election is June 5th. And you also have plenty of time to request an absentee ballot. You can request an absentee ballot up until June 23rd at 5 p.m. So this is an election that I think might be catching some people off guard, but it's a really important one. It's an important municipal election. We have a ward seat that will be determined. We also have a Norman Public School school board seat to be determined for certain precincts in Norman. That'll be important to weigh in on that one. We've got a very important state question on Medicaid expansion. So that's coming up in June. There's going to be primaries for our U.S. Senate seat, our U.S. Representative District 4 seat, our State Senate District 15 seat. So these are all important ways to express yourself and go vote. So I encourage all of you to not miss that and put that on your calendar. Early voting will be available Thursday, June 25th from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., Friday, June 26th from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., and Saturday, June 27th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And again, for anyone who has concerns about going to the polls in person, you have plenty of time if you start now to request an absentee ballot. So that is an equally important thing to think about how you're going to vote in June. So I hope everybody stays well, wear your mask, and I hope you have a good night. I also want to just give a shout out to our city staff who have been coming to work day in and day out through all of this public health emergency and have really made sure that we continue to enjoy all of the city services and that everything is working. So it's been extraordinary work that they've been doing, sometimes very short staffed. So we really appreciate all that you do to keep our city running. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Very well said. Councilmember Wilson.
Okay, let's see. Give blood. Yes. I am concerned as well about the input from the Oversight Committee about a change to our animal shelter. Yes. Let's see. Dr. Carter has very good points about wild care. They're very important as a member of Ward 5 and having lived out in the country and in town, and I've taken so many animals out there. I think they think I'm seeking attention because it's like the animals, they find me. And so they're a wonderful organization that works on a shoestring budget, and I love them. And they're not in the city of Norman, but they definitely benefit the city of Norman greatly. Let's see, what else did we talk about? Lee has very good points about our census and voting. You know, people have been pretty hostile and upset with me lately as my job and what I'm doing on the city council. But you know what? Go vote. And that's a better way to handle that rather than, violence and hangings and crap like that. So go vote. You have lots of opportunity. And the city of Norman, while we're better than a lot of cities in the voting numbers, a lot of times we don't have very high voter turnout. So I'm going to say that put your money where your mouth is and just go vote. I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Scanlon.
I heard a challenge from Ward 1 about giving blood. I'll take up that challenge. I've got to keep up with you, Kate, in terms of T-shirts collected. I mentioned earlier about the Animal Welfare Oversight Committee. At the last meeting that we physically held, there was about an even split. We did not know all the details that were presented tonight. They didn't. There was overriding concern about the financial implications of this, and I tried to express that earlier. I did suggest to the members of the committee that they put their concerns in writing. And to my knowledge, that's not happened. Now I think would be the time for those folks to get together individually, collectively, whatever, to sound off with regard to the proposal as it's evolved. Elections, I have a morbid interest in the June 30th election. So I encourage anybody and everybody that's eligible to vote to please do that. And it's not just because of the Ward 6 runoff, but for the other things that Lee Hall mentioned. Casey Holman's public comment struck a chord. And I understand what motivated it, and I'm not going to comment on that particularly. But I will relate a personal experience, and it has to do with as the diversity working group was coming up with the recommendations earlier this year. Obviously, that brought up some concerns, and coincidentally, the police academy was in full swing, and I made it a point, based on the concerns expressed by that subcommittee, to attend certain lectures, if you will, certain days of instruction at the police academy, specifically those related to diversity, bias, implicit bias, what have you, treatment of the LG community, all of that. I will tell you, and I will quote Lieutenant Pendleton, who was actually running a part of that. He walked in the first day of this series and he said, folks, this is going to be the most difficult day you ever spent. And it was. It was very, very difficult to talk about the things that Carl insisted that we talk about. Now, I know from talking to several police officers in the last few days that they're embarrassed and concerned about what's going on, and they are looking forward to more instruction. But I will tell you that the police, in my experience at least, don't take this lightly. It is a major concern and they give major attention to it. So I just had to make that comment that it's a big deal. They understand it's a big deal and they're treating it as a big deal. So with that, I wish everybody a happy rest of the week, and I'm looking forward to the next few where we're really talking about dollars down and dirty. Thank you all.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Holman.
Thank you. On that same note, I would just say that, the police department is often the most visible arm of the local government, if you will. It's the part of the government that the public sees the most. The police cars are pretty noticeable, and is often the entity the public comes into most contact with. So it is really important who those people are that we entrust with that responsibility. Our police department, the overall numbers is not extremely diverse, gender or racially, comparatively. And I know it can be very difficult, though, to hire people that don't apply. So, there's always room for improvement. And if we need to do more to reach out further to get more diversity in candidates, I think that would be a good thing to reflect, our population. So I appreciate the action that has been taken in that regard, and I'll leave that issue there for now. So I would also just to add on to my colleague, Councilmember Hall, about the census, it literally can mean millions of dollars to a community over a span of 10 years in regard to federal funding. It's extremely important. It only takes a few minutes. It's not any information that is that can put you in any kind of harm, that is sensitive. It is protected. I believe census data is actually protected for 70 years, if I recall correctly. So right now you could look at the detailed census data on people that did the census back in the 30s. I'd have to double check on that, but that was my latest understanding of how that worked. So definitely encourage everybody to do that. With the upcoming election in June, I do have concern about poll workers in regard to COVID-19. The 3 people that work at my polling place, 2 of them are for sure over 70, and the other one may be also. I can't recall. So I'm definitely concerned, and I from my experience voting over the years, that is the makeup of most polling places. So definitely concerned about how in-person voting is going to work out. My polling place, unfortunately, in most cases, is the lowest voting turnout precinct in all of Cleveland County. And in the summertime when school's out, my polling place is in the middle of campus. It's across the street from my house though, which is pretty nice. But with the students being gone, there'll be even fewer people voting there. But I still am concerned about how in-person voting is going to work, given the makeup of the people we rely on to conduct those elections for us. Speaking of, voting and the importance of voting and running for office too, in June, there is a primary election for Cleveland County Sheriff. We recently lost our sheriff. I say lost, he took a job as the chief of police in Moore. And it was kind of last minute. So it left a number of people filing to run. But unfortunately, there, I think, are 4 Republicans and 1 independent. So if you're a Democrat voter, there are no choices for you on the June ballot. And in November, I guess you'll get to decide between a Republican and an independent as far as that goes. So that's a little bit discouraging, in my opinion, to not have any kind of choice in that matter. I think the sheriff is a extremely important position in the community. In this county, the sheriff is who administers the jail. And that's an issue I think is one of the most important functions of government entity, is how jails and prisons are operated and how people in those jails and prisons are treated. Most people in a county jail have not been convicted of any crime. They are simply waiting to be tried, or they can't afford to bail out. So in my opinion, how the jail is operated is extremely important to everybody. And so an election like sheriff is something everybody should pay attention to, and all the time actually. So that's my thoughts on that one. I would also mention that in regard to unemployment rate, every year we've kind of been given some rough, I don't know exactly where it comes from, but a rough number of what Norman's unemployment rate is. And I don't think that I've had anything to do with it really, but in the time that I've been on council, that number has gone down every year. So that's kind of good, but I suspect it probably won't be this year. And one of the things I would note that really has an impact on our local unemployment rate is our largest employer is the University of Oklahoma. And I think we're all very familiar with issues that the university has had over the last 2 or 3 years. A number of layoffs have taken place, and those have a definite impact throughout the community. And so we may not be as impacted by something like oil and gas, perhaps, but things that happen at OU, like we've seen in recent time, can definitely have a big impact on our unemployment numbers here locally. So that's been something I've tried to keep an eye on as well. Most of us all know somebody or have family or colleagues that have or do work for OU. So that's really important. The last thing I really have tonight is I just want to take a moment and mention one of my constituents. I posted about it the other day. He was Tom Turner. He was a volunteer for the city at the Animal Welfare Center. And he came to city council meetings pretty regularly. And during all this time, he also came to came to Friendly Market pretty often as well to talk to me about city issues and other things that were going on. And during all this, everything that's been going on the past few months, I just hadn't noticed that I hadn't seen him in a while. So I thought about him the other day, and when I checked his Facebook page, I noticed that he had passed away a few months ago. And he was just a really good man. And I really appreciate the time that he gave to Norman during his last years. And as I mentioned in my post, it's one of the more difficult things being an elected official. If you do it as long as I do, you will get to know some people really well. And it's just really difficult. You find out about them passing away, and I wish I had called him sooner. I wish I'd have known about it so I could have attended his funeral. So I just wanted to take some time and make sure that he was recognized for his contribution to Norman, and that he will definitely be missed, that I miss him. And when it's safe to do so, I will definitely be going down to visit with his wife, Norma. I drove by his house the other day, and his truck was still parked outside in the driveway in the same spot. So I look forward to talking with her about his life and the time that I got to spend with him. So anyway, I hate to cry on TV here and be all emotional, but I felt it was necessary to make sure Tom was remembered by us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. That was a beautiful tribute. And I think we all remember Mr. Turner. I know I do. And when I heard the news, I was also very upset. And what you just did was a wonderful tribute to his memory. And I think we can all only hope that we're remembered for that kind of level of service and commitment to making our cities a better place. So thank you for that, Stephen. On that note, we've mentioned the census, we've mentioned giving blood, we've mentioned some other issues. I will also give a shout out to all of our Gold Star families in memory and spirit of Memorial Day, which we just celebrated. While I hope everyone had a break and did so in a safe, social distance, facial covered manner, the holiday is about those that didn't come back, and they did it to protect our freedoms. And for some reason, Memorial Day really resounded with me this year, because we talked so much about all of our freedoms and my freedom this and my freedom that. And regardless of where you stand on that issue, we are able to have conversations about our freedoms. And that is not something I take lightly. So thank you to all of the families that have made sacrifices. As the daughter of a veteran, I've made sacrifices as well, but I fortunately did not have to make the ultimate sacrifice, and I can only imagine the pain. So to all of you out there who did that, we are thinking of you in Norman. But we have other issues to consider at this time. So we need to adjourn into an executive session as authorized by Oklahoma Statute Title 25, Section 307B3 to discuss the transfer of property located at 911 West Main Street to Norman Public Schools. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn out of the city council meeting and convene into an executive session.
Second.
The motion on the floor is to adjourn out of the city council meeting and convene into an executive session. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Bierman,
Aye.
Councilmember Carter,
Aye.
Councilmember Patron,
Aye.
Councilmember Hall,
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson,
Yes.
Councilmember Scanlon,
Aye.
Councilmember Holman,
Yes.
Mayor Clark.
Yes.
Motion is approved unanimously. Give us a few minutes to cancel out of the live broadcast and then you can start.
All right. Let's take a couple minutes. I shall return shortly.